All right, back. Wanted to discuss something that I've experienced. A lot of people have, and it's a big problem in our country today, and in a lot of relationships, and that would be cognitive dissonance. I've alluded to it in prior videos, primarily talking about the cognitive dissonance associated with the second coming, and how that is such a central part of the practice of Western religion and what those expectations are. And we've gone a couple thousand years since it was supposed to be near. The day of the Lord is near. And, excuse me, it's something that's caused cognitive dissonance. And, that community, and I was part of it, needs that to happen. They want it to happen because it validates that faith. And they expect it to happen. And as I've posited before, I think the collective unconsciousness of our society is going to create something like that. And that I think there's two purposes to the book of Revelation. One is to show humanity that you're the creators, and everything that's not natural out there on this planet, we've created as part of this environment that we interact with. And that our thoughts create. And when you get such a large body of people wanting something or expecting something so fervently, those thoughts collectively are going to create something like that. But I don't think that's the real intent of Revelation, as we've previously discussed in my book. And that's why I have this channel, is from Genesis to Revelation, the story you find yourself in. That Revelation is about us. The esoteric Bible starts at the beginning and it goes all the way through. And that's about our own ascension, that process of becoming spiritualized. So it has a dual meaning. One is what we're to do on the inside game. The other is collectively our unconsciousness is producing something of that nature out there because it's something that we're thinking about. We want it to happen. But when it doesn't happen, there's that cognitive dissonance of okay, how do I rationalize this? Because that's really the thing that happens. Now, I'm not a psychologist. Like I said, I've learned a lot of psychology going through the Bible and understanding what it has to say about the human mind and how we're constructed for this journey. And it jives with Carl Jung and really and many others that have gone through the awakening experience. But I'm gonna read some of this stuff, and then eventually I'll get to my own kind of codependent experience. And right off the bat, I'll say I'm no longer codependent. So that's gone. That guy is dead. Killed that guy. And but as a result of not being codependent, I've done the shadow work. I've worked through it. There's other things that have manifested. It's kind of the pendulum swings that I'm still trying to figure it out. And the next video is going to go deeper into that. I'm going to talk about the dark night of the soul and the world in which we live in, and why that reorientation is as challenging as it is. But for now, cognitive dissonance is the perception of contradictory information and the mental toll that it takes on you. When two actions or ideas are not psychologically consistent with each other, people do all in their power to change them until they become consistent. The discomfort is triggered by the person's belief clashing with new information perceived wherein the individual tries to find a way to resolve the contradiction to reduce their discomfort. Human beings strive for internal psychological consistency to function mentally in the real world. A person who experiences internal inconsistency tends to become psychologically uncomfortable and is motivated to reduce the cognitive dissonance. They tend to make changes to justify the stressful behavior, either by adding new parts to the cognition, causing the psychological dissonance by rationalization, or by avoiding circumstances and contradictory information likely to increase the magnitude of the cognitive dissonance, and this would be confirmation bias. And the way to reduce cognitive dissonance is you change the behavior or the cognition. So when you're in these relationships, you say, okay, I'm going to change my behavior to match what I'm experiencing. So that's a violation of self when you do that, if you're not aware of what you're doing. You justify the behavior or the cognition by changing the conflicting cognition. So you try to change the dynamic that you believe is causing that disconnect. Then you justify the behavior or the cognition by adding new behaviors or cognitions. Justifying the behavior of somebody else to fit your preconceived notion or your expectation, probably based on what you had already experienced out of that person. And we're going to get to that in a bit. But a lot of this still goes back to our dealings with the world. I mean, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance being used to control us. And that's all, the whole totalitarianism is based on that. And really, like I said earlier, the Vatican is a perfect model of an institution that creates cognitive dissonance. You ignore or deny information that conflicts with existing beliefs. So you just choose to not digest that information because it violates something in you subconsciously. It just doesn't work, and you want to hold on to the original impression, the original belief you had about that particular person or institution. And then selective exposure theory, avoiding the conflicting messages coming from the side that one has disassociated with. So looking at political institutions, our society has had to make a choice. So it's selective exposure. If I'm on the right, I'm going to watch Fox. If I'm on the left, I'm going to watch CNN, MSNBC. I'm just going to refuse to accept the other side's dialogue. I'm right, they're wrong. And then one of the paradigms is called belief disconfirmation. It's selective and voluntary misperception, rejection, or refutation of the contradiction, seeking moral support from people who share the contradicted beliefs or acting to persuade other people that the contradiction is unreal. And that's probably prevalent, really, political institutions and religious institutions. Once you're indoctrinated into a belief system, because it's so pervasive and it's so comfortable. I mean, you want to be part of a community. You want to have those relationships, and so you have that confirmation bias. You just say, this is what I'm going to believe, and I'm going to find a way to dismiss the other, even if there's some rationality to it or something relevant about it. You tend to push it away. And then that cognitive dissonance, it does lead to trauma bonding. And the trauma bond is an emotional bond with an individual that arises from a recurring cyclical pattern of abuse perpetuated by intermittent reinforcement through rewards and punishments. So, and that's the classic narcissist codependent relationship. And we'll get into that a little bit deeper. But there's 7 stages to this. The first one's love bombing. The narcissist and the codependent, man, they're just magnetically attracted. And we're going to talk a little bit about that dynamic, particularly as it related to me and my wife. It's peculiar that I met her. She was coming off. She's very codependent. She was coming off a narcissistic relationship that destroyed her. And I've already revealed that about me. Now she's not codependent anymore. I mean, she can stand on her own, and we're going to get into some discussions about how what happens when you go into to challenge that part of your nature. The second is trust and dependency. So part of that, the love bombing, there's this effort to create trust through the knowledge that you've gained about that other person. And narcissist and codependent react a little differently on both of those angles. The third is kind of criticism kicks in, then gaslighting. Resigning to control is the fifth. It's the narcissist then works to maintain control of you, the codependent just kind of moves into that place. Then the codependent has a loss of self, and then you're addicted to these cycles of dependency, and ultimately it's going to end, and it's probably going to end badly. But those are the seven natures. Now, a lot of that stuff. There's so many. A lot of that. Dr. LaPera, her book How to Do the Work. She's the best that I've seen. You got Lisa Romano on Instagram. I looked at a lot of her. She's really good. And then you got for men, it's Richard Gannon. I really like him. But here's my thoughts, and I'm going to kind of customize it from here on out, and just try to rifle through this. The codependent uses their toolbox to meet the expectations and needs of others in order to obtain acceptance, loyalty, admiration, love, and the like. So we all have a toolbox, and that codependent is focused out there on getting acceptance and love and the things that they were denied that created that original child wound, because all this emanates from things that happened to us in a very early age. And I recall that's kind of what happened to me is you feel isolated, your emotions aren't acknowledged, you don't get that unconditional acceptance. And so you tuck that little guy away, and he doesn't want to feel that pain because it's painful to not have that at those early ages. But when it goes unresolved, it manifests in a way in your adult life that is destructive. And so I'm saying that the codependent tends to manipulate themselves to fit the partner's needs or expectations. And then the narcissist uses their toolbox to bend the perception of others regarding who they are, focusing on the maintenance of that facade. And so while the codependent's manipulating themselves, the narcissist is manipulating the codependent and really everybody around them. And that's, you hear about the flying monkeys, the people that are close to them and perpetuate them and hold them up. Those are the people that have bought in wholesale to the narcissist persona. And they're very magnetic, they're very charming, and it's hard not to. And once again, narcissists, I'm not saying they're bad and codependents are good, because I was a toxic codependent. That's bad. And it doesn't mean there's everything about a narcissist is bad or everything about a codependent's bad. It's just the nature of their attraction. It normally ends up in a pretty bad place. Now I'm going to take a quick look at the codependent man and the codependent woman. And once again, this is a perception just from discussions I've had with my wife. So don't take any of this as sexist or meant to be wholesale across the board, because everybody's situation is going to be different. From my view, a codependent man tends to operate from the intellect, being disconnected from his authentic emotions. And the codependent man, I think, tends to be recognized as the prize for the narcissistic woman. Because, narcissistic women are going to be attracted to men that make them look good and make them feel good. Typically, they're financially, they're successful, they're reasonably attractive, the like. All the standard stuff that you see. And on the other side of the relationship, he tends to feel used up. I felt weak and weakened, and that's not supposed to happen. So that leads to feelings of intense shame and intense humiliation. And I'm going to show you, I think the experience is digested just a little different for the man and for the woman. A man's not supposed to let that happen to himself. Because typically, everybody gets to see it. And if that man is reasonably successful, pretty secure in himself, even though the codependent, when you peel it all back, you really never were, you just didn't know it, but you have become such an intense persona that you can project that out to the world and become successful, because you have to be. If you want to be loved and be accepted and be admired, you have to be successful. So there's just an inordinate amount of energy that you can summon to make that happen. And then embarrassed, foolish. I felt so embarrassed and so foolish. And what tends to happen to a man is they will stay in this relationship much longer than they should. And by the time you're at the end, everything else about you has been compromised. You've given up control. You've in my case, even my career was damaged, and financially I was damaged, and just the whole process, and there's extensions to the narcissist world of their life that cause damage to me as well, and it's just a betrayal that's hard to digest. But by the time you get to the end, for me, and I wrote about it in my book, and it's in that book, the first book, my journal entries were in that April 5th night where I was just so distraught. The last thing that I had to give up was her. And, I was so trauma bonded. But really what was going on, and this is really where I wanted to get to, is my ego was being deconstructed, and my ego didn't want that to happen. And the last thing that I had to let go of to be spiritually awakened, you can't hold on to something more precious than God, and I was so locked into what I believed was me, making me relevant, and that was the last thing that I had left. And so the ego was holding on to it with all it had, even though it didn't make sense, even though it was damaging, even though I was dying. It said, no, don't let it go, because then I'm going to go. So at that point, for me, it was like that letting go led me directly into a spiritual awakening. Because like I said earlier, in one of the other videos, Jesus says, be like those nursing babies, before we're corrupted by the ego self. And that's what you got to be to get into the kingdom of heaven. You can't have any attachments. And we talked about that in the last video with Job. And Job had to lose everything. He was so attached to what he believed made him relevant that stubbornness was the same thing that I had to experience. Is that stubbornness just almost killed me. And so, that's what the trauma bond did to me. By the time I got to that place, it's like I cannot. My ego says, you will not make me feel this, because I'm fearful that when this happens, then you won't need me anymore, because there's nothing for me to attach to. And so, and then for the codependent in that relationship, one of the big feelings that I think happens for the man is that she completes me. So the thought was, wow, I've never felt this kind of love bombing and this kind of acceptance, and she completes me. And I think that's what a man that's, a toxic empath, I've heard it called, or codependent, he looks at that woman and she comes in and she just fills every gap. And, finally somebody understands me. And so, that's kind of at the, that's kind of the beginning. And the cognitive dissonance is, as you go through the process, you start to feel, man, what happened to the original feeling, the original relationship where I was love bombed? Now I'm being criticized. Now I'm being diminished, and I'm having to change all these things about me. I got to give up so much control of my life, and that's just not the guy I was, but now I am. And then you tend to even withdraw more because you don't want your friends and other people to see just how soft you become, just because it's weak. And in a way, it is weak. I mean, a man shouldn't let that happen to himself. And so as a result of me coming on the other side, I put up very rigid boundaries. I have an intense aversion to being in any environment where I'm going to be judged. Because as a codependent, I accepted that as just kind of the fundamental premise. I'm always being judged by what I accomplish, or what I can achieve, how much money or things. And so now I'm just saying, anywhere that I'm going to feel judgment, I'm not going. In relationships that tend to do that with me, I've pushed them away. Now I need to soften back up. I've been hardened. The pendulum has swung too far, and I got to soften up. But that's part of the dark night of the soul that I'm going to talk about in the next video. And then the other thing is you have trouble trusting yourself. And I'm going to draw some comparisons with the woman here in just a second. But one thing that I had to really work through is Stu, you got to learn how to trust yourself, because you really are untrustworthy to yourself. And then during the process, I'd given up so much control of my life, but she could feel me pulling away, and because I was having a dialogue with a therapist on the side that she was unaware of, and right at the end, the effort to maintain control, to get me back under wraps, was the threat of making an accusation of the gravest level. And my therapist was like, you got to get out of there. I've seen men go to jail and get set up. And she started talking about reactive abuse, where you get triggered. No one sees what goes on behind closed doors. And that's the classic narcissist persona. What they present out to the world is something very different than what's happening behind closed doors, and how your mind's getting all twisted up. And I started going through these episodes where I think something inside of me was telling me, you don't belong here. And I would react. I just needed to get away, get out. But I would be really angry at myself. Like, what the hell are you doing? But I had to get out of that environment. I was being humiliated. I was made to be felt less than, like dog whistling. The narcissist can say certain little things that only you understand the meaning, or that person knows just how much it stings. And but there's a lot of people that talk about reactive abuse. Now, you see it all over Instagram. The folks that are talking about codependency, and it's really coming out of the man, because the man is the one that tends to. And you hear about women also, going off on their narcissistic, partner, but there's not a whole lot of threat there. But when the man is being triggered to behave in a way where that narcissist can point back and say, yeah, he's really the crazy one. And they've already started a narrative on the other side, the smear campaign, that you can't recover from. And whatever friend group you were a part of, the best thing you can do is just say goodbye to it. And that's what I've done. And because you just can't repair it. It's just been so whitewashed that it's hopeless. So let's go to the codependent woman. They operate from the heart, whereas the man operated from the intellect, being overly trusting as they are the most vulnerable. Just inherently, the woman is more vulnerable to the man than that man is to the woman, just in terms of, you know, financial and safety and security. I mean, it's what we're supposed to do. So whereas the man is, you know, the successful man is the prize for the woman, in this scenario, the woman is set up to be the prey, because that narcissistic man is typically aware of who he is, and he sees something that he likes, and I see the woman as more the prey. That was certainly the situation with my wife and her relationship. And she said, I just wanted to fix him. I can and I want to fix him. You know, there's something really good about the guy. And a narcissist, there's probably something really good about every one of them. You know, in my relationship, there was a really beautiful person in there, but it just hurt me bad. And I can't see how, you know, that kind of relationship could ever last. But, and so on the other side of the relationship, you know, particularly with my wife, she tends to feel like she was used. Where I felt used up, she was just used. And betrayed, tricked, deceived, angry, manipulated, and abused, and above all, she was trapped. And this man had taken access to all monetary means and just had her trapped. And where I had trouble trusting myself, she's yearning to be open to trusting others again, which includes me. We blew past that. But that's I mean, those are just kind of the fundamental experiences that I had with you know, having to work through it. And then on the other side, you have to, when you're broken down that much, you have to reconstruct yourself. And you got to trust that you're doing the right thing while you're doing it. So, cognitive dissonance. We're all being subject to it in the world that we interact with. And relationships that involve a narcissist man or a woman, codependent man or a woman, I mean, you're definitely gonna have that cognitive dissonance experience, and it'll rattle your world, and then you just got to readjust, come back out, and be stronger than you were. But that's it. I appreciate you listening, and I'm going to get back to you with the dark night of the soul in the world that we live in. Thank you. Bye-bye.